My damnation came in the form of a bottle. No, not like that. When I was a child, my best friend lived next to a little junkyard, a great place for a kid to hang out. The place was full of mystery and exciting discoveries, and if you found anything nice, nobody minded if you took it. Well, no one but your parents. The only exception was my friend's mom. Most of their bowls and plates came from that junkyard, but I digress. One day, a bunch of us were hanging out there, dismantling a car. Some of us were interested in the parts, but I just thought breaking stuff was great. When we'd gotten the engines drawn everywhere, we set to work on the interior. Under one of the seats was a little glass bottle, full of some green, bubbly liquid. Curiosity trumped hygiene in those days. I uncorked it and sniffed it. The smell was pleasant, minty, and a little floral. One kid, Jackie, dared me to drink it. It was a double dog dare. I had to. The taste was also pleasant, and it warmed me on the way down. My body was filled with a strange, pleasant tingling. Nothing else happened, not until that night. The first effect was that I couldn't sleep. I haven't needed sleep since. It's alright though. I get a lot done. The second effect came a month later. I started to cough things up. I was playing alone in the woods and hacked up blood. Not just liquid, but chunks as well. Then I was puking. The entirety of my coiled long intestine came snaking up as I sat there quivering, tears on my cheeks, struggling to breathe. I was literally puking my guts out. My mouth seemed to unhinge like a snake's to accommodate my lungs. My heart was on my sleeve. The bloodstain would never have come out if I hadn't abandoned the clothes I was wearing. The police searched frantically for a missing person, but never found a thing. I wasn't empty when I finished, though. New organs built up inside me. I could feel them. I could see them when I closed my eyes. Nameless lumps and spirals springing out of nothing. Finally, the third effect. 2 months later, I began to crave exuberant amounts of water. I can't possibly describe the feeling of thirsty skin, but it was a desperate thirst. I left my parents' house one night and walked until I came to a swamp. I moved in. The murky, bug-filled waters feel like home now, as they did all those years ago. I sit under the water, watching the fish and salamanders get eaten by herons, looking at the surface and waiting for my prey. I'm sure you know what the fourth effect was. I'm typing this on the cell phone of my latest victim. She was delicious. She smelled just like fresh melons. To homeless children sleeping on the street, neon is as comforting as a nightlight. Angels love colored light too. After nightfall in downtown Miami, they nibble on the nation's bank building, always drenched in a green, pink, or golden glow. They eat light so they can fly, 8-year-old Andre tells the children sitting on the patio of the Salvation Army's emergency shelter on Northwest 38th Street. Andre explains that the angels hide in the building while they study battle maps. There's a lot of killing going on in Miami, he says. You want to fight, want to learn how to live. You gotta learn the secret stories. The small group listens intently to these tales told by homeless children in shelters. On Christmas night a year ago, God fled heaven to escape an audacious demon attack, a celestial Tet offensive. The demon smashed to dust his palace of beautiful blue moon marble. TV news kept it secret, but homeless children in shelters across the country report being awakened from troubled sleep and alerted by dead relatives. No one knows why God has never reappeared, leaving his stunned angels to defend his earthly estate against assaults from hell. Demons found doors to our world, adds Miguel, who sits before Andre with the other children at the Salvation Army shelter. The demons' gateways from hell include abandoned refrigerators, mirrors, ghost town, the nickname sheltered children have for a cemetery somewhere in Dade County, and Jeep Cherokees with tinted or black windows. The demons are nourished by dark human emotions, jealousy, hate, fear. One demon is feared even by Satan. In Miami shelters, children know her by two names, Bloody Mary and La Llorona, the crying woman. She weeps blood or black tears from ghoulish empty sockets and feeds on children's terror. When a child is killed accidentally in gang crossfire or is murdered, she croons with joy. If you wake at night and see her, a 10-year-old says softly, her clothes be blowing back, even in a room where there is no wind, and you know she's marked you for killing. The homeless children's chief ally is a beautiful angel they have nicknamed the Blue Lady. She has pale blue skin and lives in the ocean, but she's hobbled by a spell. The demons made it so she only has power if you know her secret name, says Andre, whose mother has been through 3 rehabilitation programs for crack addiction. If you and your friends on a corner on a street when a car comes shooting bullets and only one child yells out her true name, all will be safe. Even if bullets are tearing your skin, the Blue Lady makes them fall on the ground. She can talk to us, even without her name. She says, "Hold on." A blonde 6-year-old with a bruise above his eye, swollen huge as a ruby egg and laced with black stitches, nods his head in affirmation. "I've seen her," he murmurs. A rustle of whispered, "Me too's," ripples through the small circle of initiates. Today was the day he was dreading. He knew they were going to be extremely busy, and quite frankly, he wanted to call out, seeing as he was already late. His thoughts were briefly distracted by his black tabby, quietly pawing at his legs, ready for its breakfast. He made sure to fill up its bowl before he dashed out the door, returning twice to grab whatever he forgot the first few times, and he was off. He breathed a sigh of relief as the last customer left. It had been the best sales day of the year, and they were obviously going to celebrate. He had been contemplating going on home, but he needed to unwind too. He had no serious obligations the next day, so he could stay out as late as he wanted. So when they asked, he happily agreed to go with them. He couldn't open his eyes. He was barely conscious as it was. He slapped lazily around until he managed to shut the alarm off, before he rolled onto his stomach and buried his face in his pillow. The door creaked as his black tabby walked in and jumped onto his back, where it curled up close to his head. The hot breath in his ear lulled him back to sleep. The doorbell continued to ring. He crawled out of bed and made his way to the front door. It was his next-door neighbor, a kind woman in her late 70s, who still worked. She was in her business suit, holding a trash bag. "Oh, did I wake you up? I thought you were usually up by now." "I usually am," he said groggily, "but they let me have today off." "Well, I hate to come bearing such bad news so early in the morning," she said, patting his hand. "But I ran over your dear tabby last night when I got home. I came straight over to tell you, but you weren't home." He stared at her for a few seconds, before their silence was broken by its footsteps. A young man and his new bride were honeymooning in Paris. They were having a wonderful time when she decided to see if he truly loved her. She asked him if he would love her even if she wasn't beautiful. He told her he would. So she slowly started removing her makeup, revealing a birthmark on her face. He really loved her, but he was shocked when he saw it. After seeing his expression, she left and didn't return. With time, the man began to fear the worst and went to the police. The police thought it was most likely that the girl simply had second thoughts about the marriage, but they checked out anyway and found no evidence of foul play. As weeks turned into months, the man finally gave up on finding his beautiful wife, and his life fell into a shambles. He was so filled with grief. Unable to hold a job or go on with his life, he took to wandering the world looking for anything that might ease his pain. Years later, in Borneo, he came upon a freak show in an old shabby building. He went in on a whim. In the last filthy cage, he saw a twisted, scarred, and mutilated woman rocking back and forth and groaning strange animal-like noises. He screamed as he recognized the birthmark on his wife's face. It is said when you take a picture of someone, you capture their soul in the camera. It is also said that if you print it off, that picture contains the soul itself and you can control them with it. I'm not sure where to start. Do you know what the primordial soup is? A veritable ocean of elements, all floating around randomly. And through millions of years of time, eventually, the right set of random circumstances came to pass and the elements were able to connect together and form the world's first single-cell organism. Now, that's a really boiled-down version of it, but I'm sure you get the gist of it. Fast forward a few billion years to the early 1990s, when internet use began to rapidly accelerate. Every home had a computer, and new connections between computers were opening on by the second basis. Trillions of bytes of data began to transfer around the world at the speed of light, music, text, sound, and most importantly, pictures. Now when you take a picture of someone and capture their soul, what happens when that picture is converted to data and placed on a hard drive? Does the soul follow? 15 years later, we believe so. We believe that when you take a picture of someone and upload it onto your computer, alongside the image data, a blueprint of the person's soul itself is imprinted on the file itself. Look at your pictures folder. How many souls reside in that folder alone? That's just the beginning though. These soul blueprints each retain pieces of a puzzle, parts of the soul itself as well. Recently, a group of hackers, who refer to themselves as the Cardinals, took an interest to this theory and began experiments. They found anomalies within the binary sequences of images based on similar features of the person they had taken a picture of, a binary DNA, if you will. Now, these hackers had come to possess a set of 3 extremely important data files, one AVI, one JPG, and one .mp3, each of which possessing interesting, unexplainable qualities. The first, Cradle.avi, depicts what appears to be a group of teenagers with a low-quality video camera exploring the basement of a house. The quality of the video is distorted completely beyond any comprehensibility, and the video is very low quality. For most of the video, the camera is passed around the group, handed back and forth and jerked around too much to make anything noticeable out. But near the end, the camera turns at an odd angle, and you can semi-clearly make out a young girl standing in the corner facing the wall. Her hair is long and black and she's wearing some form of white dress. You only see her for a split second, but many people who have seen the video claim there just seems something wrong with her. A bit deformed, but not in a way anyone can explain. But the truly peculiar property of this video is what happens to the user's computer at the end of it. On the last second of the video, if not already, so the video will force full screen itself. Along with this, you're left with a 1-second looping clip of a window in a wall. It loops 15 times, and then the girl is seen again, standing on the other side of the window with her back to the viewer, slowly wavering back and forth. After a few moments, the video ends and the user's computer permanently shuts down. Inspection has shown that the entire registry becomes completely corrupt, requiring the user to do a total wipe and reinstall. The second file is known as needless.mp3. This sound file, when played, plays for about 3 minutes. It is extremely distorted. One can occasionally make out some form of voice talking, but most of the sound is some form of growling, rolling, crackled roar. Users who listen to this file often experience extreme nausea and loss of balance for a brief period of time. The final file is known as burningman.jpg. The file name has nothing to do with what the actual picture depicts. Instead, it just displays a haphazard mess of overlaid and meshed images of dolls in a hallway. There also seems to be an image of a man standing with his head cast down in the background, but the image is too distorted to make anything out, much like the other files. The image, when downloaded and opened on a user's desktop, will proceed to stay permanently open on whatever program it is opened through. Not only that, the program becomes disabled. Nothing else happens. The image just permanently sits there on your desktop, unclickable, unminimizable, and you're just left there with the man's invisible gaze staring at you. From what the group of hackers were able to discern, this file seems to have pre-compiled into the data something along the lines of CMDAO. Yet, as complex and intricate as the program is, it works across all OS platforms. No one knows who the original creator is. In fact, few people have heard of it, as the file is uncopyable nor sendable. This in fact further adds to the mystery, as often receivers of this file will obtain it from random anonymous emails posted on forums on a download link, posing the question, how is that poster able to upload it? If you ever see any of these files, refrain from downloading any of them. They all have varying detrimental effects on your computers, from practically taking out your whole registry, corrupting System32, freezing your mouse, or crashing your computer. Now onwards. This group of hackers, the Cardinals, took to analyzing these 3 files and comparing their odd behaviors. They had heard of other such odd files, images, data, etc., but were never able to get their hands on them, at least as far as we know, though rumor states they in fact were able to locate and collect all of the known files like the original smile.jpg, barbie.jpg, even suicidemouse.avi. Not even the grifter was able to escape their grasp, rumor states. But rumor also states the grifter video even exists. But that's another story. Nonetheless, all these files in hand, the group lined the files up and began to meticulously work through the binary 1, 0 out of 1 at a time, checking for similar strains and series of binary that matched. And they did manage to successfully do so, at least legend states. The result was 7 individual execute files that did nothing. Simply a gibberish pile of zeros and ones. They endless puzzled over the files, each tackling an execute each. They decided to name them after themselves: lust, gluttony, greed, envy, sloth, wrath, and pride. At last, they attempted to line the files up. Remarkably, something odd happened. The copies of the files quite suddenly meshed together. The result was a single complete execute, already named, barelybreathing.exe. And what of this file? Well, not much else is known after that point. They were too smart to just execute it. They analyzed the file every possible way. Hex, binary, conversions, anything to figure out what this odd file would do. To no avail. Even after forming together, it was even bigger jumble of ones and zeros, and made no more sense than the separate executes. They backed the file up on a flash drive, and proceeded to run it. That was the last command found run on their destroyed computers a week later. Their corpses had been disfigured beyond recognition. Description of the corpses stated that it almost seemed as if they had been brutally slashed across their faces and arms. Every square inch of skin that had been bare had been mutilated, almost microwaved and then sliced repeatedly by a micro-thin razor. The government attempted to hush up the event, but there was some media leakage, and because the Cardinals had been keeping a blog amongst themselves and a few close friends, it's closed down and deleted now, so don't go trying to find it. It quickly spread out as per what they had been attempting to accomplish, and if it was or was not related to their terrible deaths. And what of the flash drive? A friend, who knew of its existence, later checked the home of the group and was unable to find it. According to reports, the drive was found in the pocket of one of the group and had been taken into custody by the police, and then simply vanished. The trail continues on, Far more, though. The file resurfaces every few weeks around the globe. Governments attempted to cover it up, but some media leaks out, of course. Look to the news for people mutilated in their own homes by a murderer, their computers stolen, etc. If you ever get a cryptic email with an attachment labeled barelybreathing.exe, for fuck's sake, do not open it. A few years ago, I suddenly remembered about a village I once visited. It was a friendly little village I discovered by chance while traveling alone. I stayed there overnight and received the most heartwarming welcome. For some reason, I don't know, I felt an urge to go there again. I have a good memory and was pretty confident that I remembered the way to get there. Once near the village, I spotted a familiar signpost from my car, which, if my memory was right, should have read blank kilometers to blank, the village's name. But strangely enough, all there was on the sign were the words, the Big Head O. I had a bad feeling when I saw it, but still decided to drive on. When I arrived at the village, I found it deserted and the buildings were covered in weeds. I was deeply puzzled and was about to get off the car when I saw, about 20 meters ahead of me, something that looked like a human with a very large head looming out of the bushes. What? What is this? While I was trying to understand what was going on, I saw other similar creatures coming out all around me. Moreover, they started to come after me, moving in a grotesque manner, with their arms lying still against their sides and their large heads swinging side to side. I was glad I hadn't left the car. I let the car run backwards at lightning speed and joined the main road. Afterwards, I checked my map, but the location of the village I visited a few years ago and the place I went on that day were unmistakably one and the same. However, I don't think I'll dare to go there ever again. Hello. This thing happened to me a few months ago. I just need to share it with somebody. It all started at my friend's party. He's an artist who rented out a loft in the industrial part of town. If you can picture what a place like Detroit looked like in the 1920s, that's what this area looks like. A bunch of old turn-of-the-century factories crammed into 10 blocks. Most of them are abandoned. So I partied a little too hard that night and decided to crash on a couch at the loft. I woke up at around 4 a.m. The sun wasn't out yet, but you could still make things out in the dim blue light. I went to the bathroom, carefully tiptoeing around the people that were passed out on the floor. As I was taking a piss, I tiptoed to look out the bathroom window, and I saw the panorama of deserted urban decay. I remembered how much I liked places like this. It was so dark and devoid of life, and strangely serene. So I went back to the couch and tried to fall asleep. After 45 minutes of staring at the ceiling, I decided I didn't want to be there any longer, so I swallowed my pride and decided to wake my girlfriend up to beg her for a ride, since walking around the vacant streets at this time was not an option. Being an awesome girlfriend, she was totally cool with it and told me she would be there in about a half hour and that she would give me a call when she was outside. My phone died 10 minutes later, so I decided I would sit by the window and watch for her car. I sat there for a while, and my eyes started getting heavy and I began to doze off. A crashing noise outside woke me up. It wasn't loud, but just enough to snap me into reality. I looked out the window and scanned the area, but didn't see anything. Across the street from the loft near a mountain of garbage bags and one of those enormous dumpsters, I see a computer and a monitor smashed against the floor that hadn't been there before. When my girlfriend arrived, I went downstairs and greeted her. Just as I was about to get in the car, I remembered a friend of mine who had blown out his power supply. So I decided to walk over to the dumpster and see what I could salvage. The monitor was worthless, but the tower seemed to have suffered almost no damage, so I put it in the trunk and we drove off. About a week had passed, and I had completely forgotten about the tower until my girlfriend called to let me know that it was still in the trunk and that she wanted it out. That night, I brought it home. Before I took it apart, I decided to hook it up to my monitor to see if it still ran, and to my surprise, it did. It ran Windows XP, and it looked like it had been wiped clean. I decided to do searches for words like tits and pussy in hopes of finding some secret stash full of weird deviant porn the previous owner had forgotten about. Morbid curiosity, I guess. Search came up nothing. Searched for picture files, nothing. Then I searched for movies, and one file came up. It was an .avi inside a folder called Barbie, hidden in the Windows System 32 directory. So I played it. Now this is where it gets disturbing. The movie was about an hour long, and was made up of what seemed like raw exported footage. The footage of this woman sitting on a chair and talking against a white backdrop. I skipped through most of the movie, and it was all the same continuous shot. Then I decided to sit through the footage to find out what she was talking about. 15 seconds into the footage, the audio goes completely bad and her voice is drowned in harsh static background noise. I couldn't make out a thing, so I imported the footage into Final Cut and tried to mess with the levels to isolate her voice. It helped a little, but I still couldn't hear what she was saying. I was intrigued now, and I began to really pay attention to her face and body language. It seems that she's being asked some kind of questions, because she stops at times to listen, and then continues talking. About 15 minutes into the footage, her face begins to redden and contort as if the questions are bothering her, but she continues to answer them anyway. Shortly after, she begins to cry. She sobs hysterically for the duration of the film. One of the few words I could lip read was skin. She repeats this word many times throughout the footage, and at one point, she even pulls at the skin from her arm and mouths the word. She seems to be unhappy with her skin. There's much more I have to get off my chest, but it is getting late and I can't go on. I'll share the rest tomorrow. God save my soul. It kept on building and building, and about 40 minutes in, she's crying so hard she can barely look at the camera. She stops talking at this point and the rest of the footage is just her crying with her head down. Oddly enough, she doesn't get up or move. The screen just fades to black. I was fucking dumbfounded. I played the whole thing through many times that night, trying to find inflections and nuances in her movement that would reveal anything else about what was going on. I felt so dissatisfied. I wanted to know more. That's when I noticed that there was about 10 more minutes left on the timeline after the screen went black, and about 2 minutes in there was more footage. The footage was extremely shaky, almost unwatchable, and depicted a pair of legs walking along train tracks. My guess is that camera was accidentally left on as it was being carried somewhere. The person in this footage walks along the train tracks for about 6 minutes, and then turns into the forest and walks over what looked like foliage flattened by a piece of plywood. The person continues on this makeshift plywood road until the movie clip ends. Now my heart started beating with excitement because there were train tracks a few miles away that looked very similar to the one in the video. I had to check this out. I called up my friend Ezra. He's 6'4", 250 pounds of mostly muscle. I convinced him to go on a little adventure with me. I'm no pushover myself, but I felt if was to go wandering in the woods looking for God knows what, extra muscle couldn't hurt. This whole idea of investigating this video had me so excited, I couldn't sleep. The next morning on a sunny Saturday, I took my flashlight, my camera, and my 7-inch Ka bar with a matte black finish and serrated edge and went to pick up Ezra. When I got to his house, he wasn't even awake. When I woke him, he pretty much told me to fuck off. I was already packed and I had mentally prepared myself to do this, so I decided to go through with it without him. I parked my car at the train station, took my stuff, and hopped onto the tracks. After walking for about 2 hours, I saw a broken piece of plywood, and my knees almost buckled with excitement. I searched the nearby foliage, and there it was, a little plywood trail leading into the forest. I walked slowly along the trail, paying close attention to everything. I would stop occasionally, kneel down, and listen for anything, or anyone, but it was so quiet. This was one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done. I didn't know what to expect at the end of this trail. The dense tree line gave way into a little island of grassy field, and then I saw it, a house being consumed by the forest. From the looks of it, no one had lived there for 20, maybe 30 years. I got my camera and snapped a few pics. A few yards away from the house was a tool shed made of rusty sheet metal. I just sat there among the trees for a while, absorbing everything. I didn't want to go into the open field. I had this bad feeling that something would see me. It took me a while to muster the courage to up to the house. The door was partly opened. I pushed it in with the flashlight and was relieved that the inside was actually very well lit. I put my flashlight away, got my camera, and took a few more pics. There was no furniture. The floor was riddled with bricks and wooden rubble, and some of the walls had huge holes in them. When I went in further to explore, I saw some things that I didn't pay much mind to in that moment, but now that I think about them in hindsight, they greatly disturbed me. The first thing that seemed a little odd was that one of the doors in the first room, that I presumed led to the basement, seemed a little too new to be in this house. It was also the only door in the house that was locked. Also, when I made my way up to the second floor, I saw some chairs and a fold-up table that also seemed a little too new to be there. But what disturbed me the most for some reason was the bathroom. The dust on the mirror had been wiped away, and in the bathtub, I saw a clear plastic tarp that still had water droplets on it from, when I presume, it was washed clean. That's when I heard something moan really loud, and that's when I jumped the fuck out of the second-story window and ran back to the tracks. Halfway there, I realized the moaning was most likely a water pipe expanding or contracting, and that little moment of relief gave into the horror which I felt when I wondered why the water would be running on an abandoned house in the middle of the fucking woods. It's been a little more than 2 months since this happened, and I haven't gone back there, nor do I plan to. Annabelle was the focus of a case that famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren took part in during the early 1970s, and is highlighted in the book The Demonologist. It has been stated that this is one of the most unusual cases of a possessed object on record. In 1970, a mother purchased an antique Raggedy Ann doll from a hobby store. The doll was a present for her daughter Donna on her birthday. Donna, at the time, was a student in college, preparing to graduate with her nursing degree, and resided in a tiny apartment with her roommate Angie, a nurse as well. Pleased with the doll, Donna placed it on her bed as a decoration and didn't give it a second thought until a few days later. Within that time, both Donna and Angie noticed that there appeared to be something very strange and creepy about the doll. The doll apparently moved on its own, relatively unnoticeable movements at first, like a change in position, but with the passage of time, the movement became more noticeable. Donna and Angie would come home to find the doll in a completely different room from which they had left it. Sometimes the doll would be found cross-legged on the couch with its arms folded. Other times it was found upright, standing on its feet, leaning against a chair in the dining room. Several times Donna, placing the doll on the couch before leaving for work, would return home to find the doll back in the room on the bed with the door closed. The medium. One night, Donna came home to find the doll had moved again. This time, it was on her bed. Donna had come to find that this was typical of the doll, but somehow she knew this time it was different. Something wasn't right. A sense of fear came over her when she inspected the doll and saw what looked like blood drops on the back of its hands and its chest. Seemingly, from nowhere, a red liquid had appeared on the doll. Scared and desperate, Donna and Angie decided it was time to seek expert advice. Not knowing where to turn, they contacted a medium and seance was held. Donna was then introduced to the spirit of Annabelle Higgins. The medium related the story of Annabelle to both Donna and Angie. Annabelle was a young girl that resided on the property before the apartments were built. She was a young girl of only 7 years old when her lifeless body was found in the field upon which the apartment complex now stands. The spirit related to the medium felt comfort with Donna and Angie, and wanted to stay with them by moving into the doll. Feeling compassion for Annabelle and her story, Donna gave her permission to inhabit the doll and stay. They were to soon find out, however, that Annabelle was not what she seemed. Later that week, Donna saw that the doll, or Annabelle, was ripped and had jagged cuts along her mouth. One night, Donna awoke to some singing like a little girl. She walked into her bathroom to see Angie dead with the words, "Wanna play?" written in the blood of her friend. The doll was never found. Lou was friends with Donna and Angie and had been with them since the day the doll arrived. He had never been fond of the doll, and on several occasions warned Donna that it was evil, saying that she should get rid of it. However, Donna had developed a personal tie to the doll and decided to keep it, despite Lou's feelings. Her decision was a terrible mistake. One night, Lou awoke with a jolt of terror, a jolt that didn't seem like it was from his usual nightmares. Somehow, something felt different. What would appear to be a common case of sleep paralysis became all too real. He looked around the room, but couldn't discern anything out of the ordinary. At first, anyway. Looking down toward his feet, he saw the doll, Annabelle. It began to slowly glide up his leg, moving over his chest and stopping at his neck. Helpless against it, the doll began to strangle him. After a moment, Lou, at the point of asphyxiation, blacked out. He awoke the next morning, certain it wasn't an ordinary night terror, and was determined to rid himself of that doll and the spirit that possessed it. Preparing for a road trip the next day, Lou and Donna were reading over maps alone in her apartment. The apartment was eerily quiet. The silence was broken when rustling sounds coming from Donna's room aroused fear that someone had broken into the apartment. Lou, determined to figure out what was causing the noise, quietly made his way to the bedroom door. He waited for the noises to stop before entering and turning on the light. The room was empty except for Annabelle, whom was tossed in a corner on the floor. Lou searched the room for signs of forced entry, but nothing was out of place. As he got closer to the doll, he got the distinct impression that somebody was behind him. Spinning around, Lou found that despite his unease, nobody besides himself and the doll were in the room. Then, in a flurry of motion, he found himself doubled over in pain, with the blood dripping from a cut on his chest. Upon opening his shirt, there on his chest were what appeared to be 7 distinct claw marks. Today, I hope you enjoy this article, and should you ever want to visit the infamous Annabelle, she can be found at the Warren Occult Museum in Moodus, Connecticut. The museum is run by Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal investigator, and now frequent guest on the television show Paranormal State. Housed in the glass case at the museum, you'll find Annabelle. Mrs. Warren relates that Annabelle still moves about occasionally and is still known to make growling noises at unsuspecting visitors. I'm always with you. I was there from the time you were born. I stood in the delivery room, staring down at you before you could even open your eyes to see me. Your family and doctors couldn't see me there in the corner, watching you with cloudy eyes, but I was there from the time you were born, and I followed you home. I was with you always, your constant companion. You played with your toys alone while I stared from all angles in nearby mirrors, my matted, clotted hair with oily sweat that hung off my dented forehead like glue. I accompanied you all the time, drifting behind your mother's car on your ride to preschool. You thought you were alone in the bathroom, but I was on the other side of the door, wind whistling through the bruised hole in my throat, my arms twisted and hanging in their sockets as I stood hunched on the other side of the shower curtain. I wait and follow you. I follow and drift behind you. I'm not seen. I'm almost non-existent in light. You never saw me that morning as I sat across from you at the breakfast table, a shiny red cloth hanging from an empty tooth socket as I gaped grotesquely at you. I wonder sometimes if you know I'm there. I think you're aware, but you'll never understand just how close I am. I spend hours of your day doing nothing more than breathing, gagging, really in your ear. I crave to be close to you, to always wrap my crippled arms around your neck. I lie near you every single night, cloudy eyes staring at your ceiling, underneath your bed, at your sleeping face in the dark. Yes, you caught me staring occasionally. Your parents came running down to your room one night. When you screamed, you were just beginning to talk, so you were only able to cry out, "Man! Man in my room!" You thought you'd never forget the sight of me, with my collapsed jaw hanging to my chest, swinging back and forth. I sank back into your closet and your mother wasn't able to see me, though you pointed and pointed and pointed. You thought you'd never forget when they left that same night. You saw the closet door crack so softly and me crawling across the floor to your bed on all fours, shambling and jerking movements as I pushed myself under your bed on disjointed limbs. You learned a new word for me, boogeyman. Not quite the monster you thought I was. I'm just waiting and following you always, stroking your face with my knotted fingers as you sleep. You'll see me again soon. Any day now. I'm coming. Blunt and brutal. One day, you'll walk across the road, and I believe I'll plow into you with a loud roar and a screech. You'll roll on the pavement, roll under wheels, blunt force metal fenders on my fingers touching your face again and again. You'll stare up from the cold pavement with cloudy eyes. Your matted, clotted hair hangs in your face and your jaw is unhinged and swaying against your chest. You'll notice me approaching. No one else will see me. You'll stare past them into my eyes, and I'll leer down at you. For the first time in our life, something like a smile will come over my face. You'll swear you're looking into a mirror as clotted bits of scarlet bubble from our mouths. I'll lean down, past the doctors and ogling people and pick you up in my crooked arms. Our faces will touch, my wings will unfurl, and then you'll have to follow me. And I'm always with you, for I'm your guardian angel. Sometime during the third consecutive night spent huddled over the toilet, insides heaving and shuddering as I vomit forth seemingly everything I'd ever eaten, I realize what's happening. He's trying to poison me. It's all so elegant, so perfect, and so clear that I almost laugh, but another barrage of retching forces me into silence. The next morning I threw everything in the kitchen away, wrapping it 3 times in black plastic and burying it deep in the apartment's communal trash cans to prevent an unfortunate transient from the crossfire of his wrath. I'm out the door of the complex and halfway to the corner store when I realize he knows, must know, where I would shop. I pick a direction and walk, enjoying the chill winter air that soothes the ragged shreds of my inside. I turn at random intervals, following an improbable path out of my familiar neighborhood until I find a small shop with an unfamiliar name. Once inside, I hurriedly fill a small plastic basket, brands that I never have eaten, strange tins of ethnic ingredients I don't recognize, foods that I never thought of buying. Soy milk, tofu. I can feel my stomach reborn in anticipation of an untainted meal. I prepare the meal in a fog of nervous anticipation, trying to focus on savoring the aromas and the grease-spitting sounds of the frying pan. It tastes clean, but then, so as every other meal before this. I try to tell myself that the mounting pain inside me is simple fear and anxiety, but before the stroke of midnight, I am again crouched in the dingy bathroom, surrendering the day's work into the porcelain mouth of the sewer. The next day, I pack up the remaining food and dispose of it with the same care, I eat out that day, layering debt onto the last of my credit cards at restaurants on the opposite side of town. He's more clever than I could ever imagine, and I'm awash in despair as I spend another sleepless night gagging and sobbing on the tile floor. I imagine the algorithm, the perfect predictive models at its disposal, brilliantly charting my every move across the city. Every time I thought I'd outwitted him, I was willingly walking into his web. I buy a candy bar from a vending machine in the theater and hold it close like a talisman. When I get home, I fill the bath a few inches deep with rust-colored water and hold a little plastic-wrapped bundle beneath the water and squeeze. I know that I'll see it, but it still breaks my heart when I do. A thin, almost invisible stream of bubbles picks out the point where a foreign object has pierced the protective layer. Through the haze of piercing hunger, I convince myself to try, just one bite, and to take the chances. It's a gamble that I do not win. In the small hours of the morning, as I press my fists into my empty protesting belly, I imagine the legion of his followers sliding silently through the restaurants and produce aisles of my life, slipping hypodermic needles into carefully selected packages of food. They are ruining and corrupting at his whim, surgical and efficient, before vanishing into the throng of the city at my approach. They'll always be one step ahead of me until I learn to think in new ways, to chart new cognitive pathways, and turn the game back upon him. So I tell myself, this is what I must do. The first day of my new life, I spend in the small living area of my apartment, organizing my thoughts with clean and sterile efficiency, and conserving what energy I can for my wasting body. Night brings the retching sickness, but all that arises is water, and pills, half digested in the bilious water. The pills, of course. Not for the first time. I feel a sharp twinge of respect for crystalline perfection of his plans. I dump the last of my dozen prescriptions into the toilet. On my third day, I feel a clarity and a sense of purpose that shocks me in its intensity, and my will penetrates the starvation malaise. I must win, or I'll die. The rashes and sores in my cheeks are deeper, and I can feel the gentle sway of loose teeth in my desiccated mouth where I grind them in thought. He's winning, but not for long. There is still time. Water, I collect from the roof in small army of cheap hardware buckets. I know that somewhere in the Byzantine plumbing of the aged building, there must be one of his infernally clever devices, a tiny pump, squatting like a predator and pulsing its vile content into the water main. I'll have to give up bathing, a small sacrifice. The rainwater will keep me alive for a while longer, but I must find a way to eat. The answer comes to me in small unconnected puzzle pieces over the next few days. While gently working another loose molar from my bleeding gums, they suddenly snap together, and a warm smothering blanket of epiphany coats my aching frame. The clattering of the tooth into the sink basin is like the ringing of bells. Late in the evening, I begin another unconscious drive, drifting through the city on shaking and atrophied legs, knowing full well that he's watching. But this, my beautiful solution, is beyond even his reach. I choose the house at random, and then, in one final attempt to baffle the algorithm, turn around and choose another house across the little tree-lined street. I sift through the mail. It's a small sample size, but enough to confirm the most necessary of facts. A single occupant. The poor man is surprised to have a visitor at all, and his face contorts with fear as I force my way inside. I'm flooded with guilt and regret as I push him to the floor and strike quickly with the crowbar I pull from the folds of my jacket. No. I must steel myself. This is his fault. He has brought us to this, and this poor man is just another of his victims. I make quick work of the meat, the muscle memories of summers spent hunting in the mountains flaring up with each quick cut. I allow myself a quick bite, a feast to my shrunken, withered stomach. The iron and mineral salt taste floods my head like a vapor, and I bawl in relief, like a child. When I have the meat packed tight into my rucksack, I light a single candle on the top floor of the little house and turn the gas range on high. I'm not yet home when I hear the low rumble in the distance. The pulsing lights of fire engines highlight the black cloud hanging in the sky. For the first time in more than a month, I sleep well, my body rapidly healing as pure, untainted nutrients penetrate my cells. I'm not yet well, But after a few more meals, I'll be ready, once more, to fight him. I know I can beat him now. I know the algorithm can only predict the actions of my past self, bound by the laws and morals of the old world. That world is dead. I am a free man. Children are fascinating creatures. I can't help but marvel at the way they act and think. Their minds are molded so easily, so effortlessly, like the softest of dough and the strongest of hands. I worry that I'll never understand this child, though, and how she thought. These things drifted through my head as I examined the dimly lit room. The doors and windows were taped off with crime scene ribbon. The sticky messes on the floor were being sampled by a forensics team. The sight before me was grisly. What was once an 8-year-old lay on the ground. One wouldn't be able to tell what she was, just by looking. Her head was hardly attached, if only by the spinal column. It lolled grotesquely to the side. The syrupy liquid coagulated after all these hours. One eye was missing from the skull and sitting a few feet away. There was a gap where her stomach used to be, as if bitten through by a beast. Innards lay strewn about her, like a party popper on New Year's. Ghastly slash marks adorned her tiny wrists, hands and fingers crusted with blood and shredded bodily tissue, most likely from who or what was after her. Clearly something wanted her dead. Her parents were in similar conditions. A mother, a father, and a grandmother, all strewn about the living room. The place was a bloodbath. It made my stomach turn. It was clear that there was a struggle. Toys, dolls, puppets, blocks were flung about the place, magazines, broken glass. The living room looked like nightmare fuel. I gagged at the smell of blood and insides. They had to be at least 3 days old. It was becoming too much. Dizzily, I turned and walked away from the scene. Perhaps somewhere else in the house would be easier to stomach. I found myself upstairs once my days passed. From the looks of it, I was in the child's room. No sign of struggle here. All was peaceful and everything was in place. Except one thing. A notebook. A little school notebook lay open on the floor. I plucked it from the ground, turning it over in my hand. I nearly dropped it out of shock. Crusty, bloody lettering covered it. Symbols, signals, and signs. A face was scrawled on the paper, on almost every page. A stitched up, twisted face. The eyes were blacked out with tiny lines through them, like buttons. It looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. A small piece of paper fluttered out of the pages and landed on the floor. I knelt and picked it up. "Don't you fear, my child. I'll keep the ghouls away. I'll keep you safe at night. I'll be your friend by day. But when it comes to friends, I have very few. So please don't leave me, darling, or my heart will be torn in two." This didn't seem quite right. I turned the paper over and read the back. "Madame Za's worry dolls. Your friend. Till the end." How strange. I paged through the book again, starting at the beginning. It looked like any normal diary. Little things were written about friends at school, conflicts with parents, though one thing caught my eye. "Grandma got me a doll for my birthday. It's nice, I guess, but scary. Mom said I couldn't give it away. I don't want it, though." A few pages later was a similar entry. "I keep Grandma's doll in the drawer. I don't like its eyes. It stares at me at night. It's creepy." There were several more like this. "The doll watches me wherever I go now. Its head turns. None of my other toys have come alive before. It's weird, but neat. I named my doll Aggie. She's not so bad. She told me today that we're gonna be friends. Aggie doesn't like my mom or dad or grandma. I don't know why. Maybe because they think I play with her too much." The entries became more and more disturbing as I read them.
Aggie made me mad today. She called my mom bad things. She wouldn't stop talking, so I ripped off her eye. She didn't like that. I said sorry later. Aggie's my best friend. I love Aggie. I hate my parents. Help!
After the last entry, there was nothing but scribble and symbols. A chill struck my spine. I felt acid of vomit rising in my throat. Something was terribly wrong. I had been in the room for hours and hadn't realized it. Hastily, I made my way downstairs as quickly as I could. The house was empty. The investigators were no longer there. All that was left was puddles of blood in the mess. The bodies had been removed already. I glanced around the room, my eyes skimming over anything that could mean something.
She did this to herself, you know.
I nearly shit myself at the sound of the hollow female voice. It sounded like it was right next to me, old and ancient. I spun around, looking for the source, and halted abruptly as they passed the doll I'd seen earlier. One of its button eyes were gone. No, 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 no. Impossible. The voice came again.
She did it to herself.
There was no movement anywhere, but the sound came from the direction of the dolls. I felt crazy for doing it, but I spoke. Aggie?
Yes?
The voice replied, almost pleased that I was speaking to her. That was it. I couldn't hold it anymore. I vomited. This was far too much for me to handle.
Oh dear, she said to me. Poor thing. Come and sit down. You're not feeling well.
What the fuck? I choked, swearing to God I was having a dream. Regardless, I bit.
Did it to herself?
What does she do to herself? Who?
Yes, the girl. She did it to herself. I saw the whole thing. Killed her family, one at a time. Granny was first to go. She used her own little hands.
The doll's head lolled over to the side, as if someone pushed it.
Ripped them apart. Then herself. She tore out her own eye, you know. I saw it. Then she ripped her own throat. It's an amazing thing. Possession. Before she even knew it, she had torn open her insides like a gutted fish. That's what she gets. The little bitch.
I couldn't believe what was happening. I was being spoken to by a fucking puppet. A doll. A toy. It was talking and moving. A fucking plaything just described to me a terrible murder. It was horrifying, but alluring. I had to be crazy. I had to. But I moved closer to listen and to ask. Why? I said, my eyebrows furrowing in confusion. The doll simply shook her head.
Shh. Don't ask. It'll be okay.
A rush of hot air filled my head. My mind was suddenly blank. My eyes were drooping and tired. I was losing control. My hands suddenly lifted and made their way to the front of my shirt, fingers gripping at my flesh. It hurt, but I didn't want to stop.
Don't tell my secret,
Aggie whispered to me. All I did was nod. My nails began digging into my skin. Blood began trickling, appearing through my shirt. Within seconds, my fingers were embedded into my flesh, the first two knuckles sinking in the warmth. It hurt. It hurt. I was on fire. No, I started, unable to control my movements. No! My flesh was tearing, the muscles rending in two. She had me. She had me completely as I felt the pressure of my organs pressing against the muscle and membranes. This was it. I couldn't stop. Full name, Nina Hopkins. Alias, Nina, Nina the Killer, Crazy Fangirl, Jeff the Killer Knockoff. Relatives, unnamed parent. Mother, deceased. unnamed parent. Father, presumed deceased. Chris, brother, deceased. Occupation, high school student, formerly. Serial killer, currently. Powers and skills, armed and unarmed combat, great speed, high pain tolerance, extraordinary strength, durability, superhuman stealth, evasion, tracking, status, alive, species, human. Nina the Killer, or Nina Hopkins, is the titular main protagonist of the creepypasta story of the same name, Nina the Killer. Nina was once a normal fangirl of Jeff the Killer, but turned into an insane and remorseless serial killer after one horrible day at school. Origin. Warning: any cuts the creator has made will be taken into account. The story summary has been made to be as accurate as possible to the originally published. Any attempts to bring up cuts, taken information from the story, will not be counted as canon if the original story entirely has already been cropped, changed. And yes, the story has been changed to fit the story found in the links given in the facts section of the page. Apologies to any mistakes made beforehand about the tale. She started as a normal fangirl of Jeff. Nina would adore the creepypasta character for nearly every quality about him, and continue to read the story. Chris wouldn't mind the obsession, and would look up to his sister. They both got along quite well, with the occasional nickname Nina gave Chris, like Prince, for his appearance being oddly similar to the common fairy tale. However, after attending their school, a few bullies, the ringleader being a slightly older girl by the name of Claudia, and her associates Malcolm and Yoni, had begun to harass Nina and Chris, with the first incident of the harassment leading to Nina almost killing her bullies. Chris is obviously disturbed by the events as Nina begins to explore her more violent nature, finding a link with the behavior towards her idol, Jeff. Nina went to change into some fresh clothes, and as the room is revealed, Nina owns more possessions relating to the creepypasta character, such as posters, clothes, notebooks, stuffed animals, and dolls. One doll that she kept within her closet, and whispers that Jeff had made so. After returning to school, a letter was found in her locker detailing how she was caught in the act of attempted murder, but was instead complimented for her extreme skill. No signature was found on the note, but Nina seemingly knew the culprit behind the message given to her. During the second incident with her bullies, they decided the smartest decision to make was to quickly kidnap and beat Chris up before returning him to Nina after lunging him out of a car. Frustrated and triggered by the events against her innocent brother, Nina refused to harm someone as revenge, but informed her mother instead, so Chris could receive medical attention, unknowing about the culprit behind the crime. Nina then decided to stay off school for a few weeks, to help her brother recover from his internal and external wounds. Another letter, upon returning to school, is found by this anonymous writer describing their sympathy towards the matter that befell Chris, asking that they'll be her friend, causing Nina to blush with excitement. The day goes as usual, with picture day arriving and Nina doing what many would assume, dressing similar to Jeff the Killer. The day had passed, but by the next, the trio eventually found Nina and Chris, and Claudia at this stage had a more harmful weapon than a knife, a gun apparently. They chased Nina in an abandoned house nearby, leading to an almost fatal shootout, with Nina successfully dodging the bullets fired at her and escaping into a bathroom. But much to Nina's horror, Claudia begins to mention their attack to Chris, which is the ultimate trigger to break Nina's sanity. Finding an iron rod to attack back, she first strikes Yoni's head, causing blood to splatter everywhere in the process. Malcolm and Claudia, shocked and disgusted by her terrifying look of insanity, take a few steps back before Malcolm becomes her next target. Nina and Chris leave the horrific scene, where she later on decides to find any bleach to mimic Jeff's disfigurement. To Nina's surprise, and the audience's, Jeff finally makes his appearance in this scene. He informs her whilst holding the bottle of bleach in his hand that she has the potential needed to become a killer like himself. So, with his assistance, Nina begins to set ablaze as her screams echo throughout the house, leading Chris and their mother rushing to Nina's aid. As their resort, a bucket of water was poured onto her to stop the fire spreading further across the face before an ambulance was arrived to carry Nina away to recover from her wounds. She woke up with bandages around her face. She walked to what she thought was a mirror and started to unwrap the bandages. She finished and saw herself in the mirror. She had almost white skin with a leather-like texture.
I'm beautiful, but not done yet.
She punched the mirror corner and picked up a shard of glass. She started to slit the creases of her mouth, just like Jeff. Her mom walked in, horrified by what she had seen.
Aren't I beautiful, Mommy?
She asked. Her mom screamed and started to run, but Nina was too fast. She took the mirror shard and slit her mother's throat. A doctor ran in along with 3 police officers. They tranquilized her and took her to an asylum. She woke up in a white padded room in a straitjacket. A nurse was next to her, stitching up her recent cuts. Nina tugged and moved, but was locked down. It wasn't long before she passed out. She woke up another time, but in a different room and with no jacket. It was an empty room with a window covered by bars, an iron door, and a small, white bed. Nina had gone fully insane. She ripped apart the mattress, getting a spring and calling for help. A doctor came rushing in, and she slit his throat the moment he came in, and ran. She was fast and bolted for the door. People were so scared. The doors got malfunctioned open by the blood on the doctor's tablet which controlled them, and Nina managed to escape the asylum. The first place she went to was her home. She got there and beat on the door. It was around 3 a.m., so she had an advantage. Her father came to the door and was immediately shocked to see who was at the front door. His daughter, stitched up on one side of her mouth, white and leathery, and standing right in front of him. He tried to shut the door, but Nina pushed him back and he fell on the corner of a table, got cut by it, and bled to death. Then she grabbed the kitchen knife and headed upstairs. She entered Chris's room.
Do you want to join me?
She asked Chris. He woke up and gently shook his head. She nodded and said, "Good," while plunging the knife deep into Chris's chest, covering his mouth with her hand. Before her brother took his last breath, she whispered,
"Go to sleep, my prince,"
before running out the house in search for her one and true love, Jeff. Appearance. Nina's appearance is identical to Jeff's, emulating his pale, white complexion and Chelsea grin. But instead of having burnt-off eyelids, she instead sewn her eyelids wide open. In the canon story, she is described as wearing a fuchsia-colored hoodie, a black miniskirt, red and black thigh-high socks, and purple Converse shoes. Her hair is jet black and is tied into a high ponytail in a bright red bow. Her hair has a single magenta streak which she dyed herself. Personality. Before losing her best friends, she was a happy, sweet social girl. When the 2 best friends died, she became quiet and less social due to the bullying. After finding out who's Jeff the killer, she became insane and isolated herself. That changes after going to an asylum. She then started talking about unnecessary topics, like a wall, and going even more insane. She finally broke out of the asylum and met Jeff, but that wasn't pretty though. To this day, she still wants to find Jeff. She tends to dress like Jeff to try and think like him. She'll do anything to find him. Facts. Nina the Killer was created by Allegotic Twevel. She's about 15 to 17 years old. Like Jeff, Nina also uses a kitchen knife to kill. Before going insane, she had light ivory skin and light brown hair. Her enemies are Clockwork and Jane the Killer. She likes the sight of blood and killing. A somewhat underestimated creepypasta. It's much speculated that Nina knows about Jane the Killer not liking her. Ironically, her backstory is similar to her crush, Jeff. She has a 2021 version which was revamped by her original creator.